Now, you might be saying to yourself, Dave, why are you calling these three guys losers? Each one of them was elected president of the United States, then reelected as president, and served 24 consecutive years as president. And before they were president, they were either governors or a senator. And to that, I say you're right. But did you know that each one of these men ran for the U.S. House of Representatives only once, and each of them lost those bids to Congress? In this video today, we're going to talk about the losing campaigns of Bill Clinton in the 1974 Arkansas 3rd Congressional District, George Bush's in 1978, the 19th Congressional District in Texas, and the 2000 election loss of Barack Obama in Illinois' 1st Congressional District. Hello, my name is Dave, and welcome to Election History. I have a master's degree from McGill University in political science and worked in politics for over 30 years. If you like videos about elections, campaigns, candidates, political parties, and the likes, please subscribe to the channel and click the little bell so you are notified of new videos. If you want to help out and support real independent historical research on these subjects, please join my Patreon with the link in the description below. Here I have all of my current Patreons and YouTube members, and I want to thank all of you for helping out. You can also do a one-time donation with the thanks button below here on YouTube. Again, thank you all for your support. Before we get into the video, if you would like to see my video about John F. Kennedy's first congressional win, check out this video, which I will link in the description below. With that, let's start off with our first candidate, Bill Clinton. Arkansas's 3rd Congressional District had been one of the poorest regions in the state before the 1970s. However, with a small store from Bentonville starting to explode in popularity, Walmart was starting to bring more jobs into the district. The district is home to the towns of Fayetteville, Fort Smith, and Hot Springs, as well as the University of Arkansas, which had a liberal student body, especially in the 1960s. But like the Appalachian Mountain region in eastern Tennessee, this area had stronger Republican roots than most places in the South and was actually opposed to the Confederacy during the Civil War. For one term, the district was represented by J. William Fulbright, who eventually became the state's U.S. Senator after one term in the House. He was replaced by James Trimble, a conservative Democrat. Unlike other congressional districts in Arkansas, which usually saw the Democrats unopposed, Republicans started opposing Trimble in 1962. In 1964, the Republican candidate for Congress, J.E. Hinshaw, won 45.3% of the vote, showing that Republicans could be competitive in the district. In 1966, John Paul Hammerschmidt, who was the chairman of the Arkansas Republican Party at the time, defeated Trimble by a 6-point margin. Now, I'm not going to get into the specifics of that race, but a good paper about the 1966 3rd Congressional District race is in the description below. As for John Paul Hammerschmidt, he was a conservative on racial issues, but was also very pro-business. By the time the 1966 campaign came, the South became more economically conservative, opposing many of the Great Society programs of Lyndon Johnson. And since Northwest Arkansas was already moving in the direction of the Republicans before 1966, it wasn't a surprise that this district actually shifted. While in Congress, according to Michael Barone, Hammerschmidt was, quote, a fairly reliable conservative, a member of the Public Works Committee who tends to support pork barrel projects and oppose things like diverting gasoline tax money to mass transit. Back in the district, he is known as a friendly congressman who keeps in touch with his constituents constantly through letters and visits to the district. And that reputation was enough for him to win overwhelming victories against lackluster Democrats in 1968, 1970, and 1972. As for 1974, his opponent was Bill Clinton. Now, Bill Clinton just finished his law studies at Yale University and returned to the University of Arkansas to become a law professor. During his few months back, he not only connected with students, which would be a great resource for volunteers for a congressional run, but others within the legal and academic community who would help him connect with others. When he lived in Arkansas when he was younger, he was involved with politics and still had some connections, but the academic community helped him expand his political reach. When it came to finding a Democrat to run against Hammerschmidt, nobody wanted to put their necks on the line. The problem was that while Democrats were talking about it, nobody wanted to actually do it. Also, with the state Democrats about to head into one of the most heated Senate races in its history, with Governor Dale Bumpers challenging incumbent J. William Fulbright, many local Democrats might be busy with that primary. It was then when Clinton decided that he might make a run for the congressional seat. In late 1973, Clinton had to make a quick decision. As Hillary Rodham was visiting him in Arkansas from Yale, the two had yet to be married yet, he received a phone call from John Doerr, who had just been appointed as the U.S. House Judiciary Committee's lead special counsel regarding the Nixon impeachment. Clinton was asked by Doerr if he would join him and bring a few other lawyers as well. Clinton said that he didn't know and that he would call him back the next day, which he did, and informed him that he would indeed be running for Congress instead of joining him on the committee. The young University of Arkansas law professor first indicated that he was interested in running for Arkansas's 3rd Congressional District in early January of 1974, when he told reporters for the university's student paper, the Arkansas Traveler, that he was seriously considering running for the seat. When interviewed, Clinton said, quote, "I definitely believe a strong campaign should be made by a Democrat for the congressional seat." Further adding, quote, "Hammerschmidt is popular and will be difficult to beat, but I simply do not believe that he has conducted his office or voted in the best interest of the people who sent him." End of quote. After a few weeks, Clinton said that he was encouraged by the response that he had heard from the article and was likely to take the next steps in running. But he wasn't the only person that was seeking the Democratic nomination. David Stewart, himself only 32 years old from Fort Smith, threw his hat into the ring on February 17, 1974. Stewart was an attorney from Fort Smith, but had law offices in Danville and Russellville, Arkansas. He was also a deputy prosecutor for Yell County and was appointed to the State Claims Commission in February of 1971. 1 week later, Bill Clinton would announce that he was running for the seat on February 24th, but wouldn't officially file for his candidacy until March 22nd. Bill Clinton's campaign headquarters was in Fayetteville, and George Shelton, the executive vice president of the First National Bank of Fayetteville, was his campaign manager, with F.H. Martin, a young lawyer that Clinton used to play basketball with, as his treasurer. The campaign would open a campaign office later in Fort Smith with the help of his childhood friend, Patty Howe. The next few weeks, the field would be set. On March 9th, State Senator Gene Rainwater of Greenwood became a candidate, citing the economic and energy crisis as his top priorities. 2 days later, Greenland, Arkansas Mayor Jim Scanlon threw his hat into the ring. Both of these latter candidates talked about their experience, while Clinton and Stewart mostly focused on change. All of the candidates were quite interesting, but Clinton was the one that was known the least. He had just returned to Arkansas after 9 years on the East Coast and abroad. In a bio that appeared in the Times Record, a newspaper out of Fort Smith, Clinton was asked why he was a bachelor. Clinton's response was, quote, "I never asked anyone to marry me," end of quote. Well, of course we know this isn't true, because in his biography, My Life, Clinton did ask Hillary to marry him before, but she turned him down. Still, even though he hadn't been in Arkansas for a long time, that wasn't necessarily a bad thing, as he worked with Senator Fulbright on the Foreign Relations Committee when he was in Washington, giving Clinton a foreign policy profile that the other candidates couldn't boast. By March, it was seeming like Clinton was already proving to be the frontrunner, at least when it came to the money race. By March 21st, Clinton had raised $13,658.92 and spent $4,816.88. David Stewart had only raised $1,980 and had already spent $1,000 of that amount. The other two Democratic opponents hadn't even filed for their committee yet, thus hadn't raised any money. As for the incumbent Hammerschmidt, he raised $3,929.01. The first major campaign event, according to Clinton's autobiography, was the April 6th River Valley Rally in Russellville. It was the first event that all statewide candidates attended. Even U.S. Senator Robert Byrd from West Virginia attended and was the featured speaker. At the event, the congressional candidates would speak last, which would be well past 10 o'clock, when most of the attendees were either tired or bored with the speeches. According to Clinton, he knew that this was his only chance to make a good impression. After giving a short 2-minute speech, which focused on the economy and the Republican Party's allied economic interest, the crowd responded positively. Clinton said, quote, "Somehow it struck a responsive chord with the audience, who, though tired after a long evening, found the energy to rise to their feet and cheer. As the crowd walked out, my volunteers gave them copies of my speech. I was off to a good start." End of quote. After the speech, Governor Bumpers complimented Clinton on the speech, knowing well that he had worked for Fulbright in the past. In the middle of April, it was anybody's game. According to a poll conducted by Opinion Survey of Arkansas, Senator Rainwater was in the lead with 16%, with Bill Clinton at 13%, with 12% supporting Scanlon and only 2% for Stewart, with a whopping 57% undecided. But Clinton was expanding his network, opening up campaign offices and hiring coordinators throughout the district, with the other candidates not having the funds to do so. Clinton would get another financial boost when, on April 20th, he received the endorsement of the AFL-CIO, which would later result in a $3,000 donation from the Committee on Political Education of the state AFL-CIO. Clinton would later be endorsed by the Arkansas Education Association. The first attacks in the campaign came from David Stewart, who said that all three of his opponents were on the state of Arkansas's payroll. Well, considering that Bill Clinton was a professor, Rainwater was a senator, and Scanlon was a mayor but also a professor at the University of Arkansas, this wasn't any surprise. Stewart argued that everyone should have resigned from their positions. Clinton said that he was only being paid for classes that he currently taught. Rainwater said that he wasn't an employee of the state, but an elected official, and that if Stewart hadn't asked Governor Dale Bumpers to resign from being the governor to run for Senate, then why should he resign? The situation didn't make Stewart look good. It kind of made him look foolish. Scanlon didn't respond to requests for comment. However, he did question whether Bill Clinton had sold out to labor in order to get the AFL-CIO's endorsement. Scanlon stated, quote, "Nothing the AFL-CIO does surprises me. I did not get the endorsement because I didn't answer the questions the way they wanted me to. I was convinced you pretty well have to sell out to them to get it." End of quote. Clinton never responded to Scanlon's allegations. But the people who knew what was going on in the counties were the chairs of the county Democratic parties. In a survey conducted by KTHV of the 14 Democratic Party chairs in the 3rd Congressional District on May 9th, found that 8 of those chairs expected Bill Clinton to win their counties, with 3 chairs saying Stewart would win and 2 chairs not having a response. When asked who was the best candidate to take on Hammerschmidt in the general election, 8 county chairs said that Clinton was, while 4 said Stewart was, with 1 undecided. By the end of the campaign, it was becoming obvious that Clinton was the frontrunner. While Clinton was going to rural counties to garner support, he continued to talk about the issues facing the district and nation, mostly focusing on the economy, increasing federal funding to local education, excess oil profits, budget cuts, and tax reform. As for the other candidates, they started spending most of their time attacking Clinton, mostly questioning his inexperience in public office, with Senator Rainwater saying on May 23rd, quote, "I'm afraid he doesn't have the necessary experience or any practical experience that would be really good for the position. He's a brilliant young man, but I think he lacks practical experience." End of quote. Still, Clinton had been outraising all of his opponents. By primary day, which was May 28th, Clinton had raised $36,054. When primary night came, Bill Clinton received 43.6% of the vote, with Senator Rainwater receiving 26.39%. David Stewart received 25.53%, and Mayor Scanlon received 4.48%. Because most southern states still required 50% to avoid a runoff election, Clinton and Rainwater would face each other 2 weeks later in a runoff. On June 4th, Mayor Scanlon would endorse Bill Clinton, with the Arkansas Young Democrats endorsing him the day before. David Stewart endorsed Senator Rainwater. By the time the runoff came, which was June 11th, Clinton had spent $43,000 according to campaign finance reports. He was also starting to get money not just from Arkansas, but from around the nation as well, such as the United Paperworkers International Union in Flushing, New York, and the United Auto Workers in Detroit. He was no longer just a locally known candidate. Clinton would go on to win the runoff election with 69% of the vote. Now it was time to take on Hammerschmidt. Clinton would take a break from the campaign trail until July 4th. Just a little over a month later, Richard Nixon resigned as president due to the Watergate scandal. Bill Clinton would later write in his autobiography, quote, "I thought that the president's decision was good for our country, but bad for my campaign." Just a couple of days before the announcement, Congressman Hammerschmidt had defended Nixon and criticized the Watergate investigation in a front page interview in the Arkansas Gazette. "My campaign had been gaining momentum, but with the albatross of Nixon lifted from Hammerschmidt's shoulders, you could feel the air go out of it." End of quote. During the primary, Clinton had a big campaign staff, but now he needed a bigger one. Seeing Arkansas's third as a possible pickup, Clinton said that the Democratic Party would need to pour about $100,000 to be competitive. In the end, Clinton would spend $180,882 on his campaign. Still, Clinton would be in a bad place, with the country moving on from the Watergate issue. He would continue to argue for good governance, a strong Congress, and issues around education. However, the campaign was stagnant. According to polls, which I assume are internal polls, as the only place that I can find them are in Clinton's autobiography, Clinton was behind 59% to 23%. But on September 8th, newly minted President Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon for all of his crimes in the past and future. At the Arkansas Democratic Party convention, Clinton slammed Ford for his pardon, saying Ford, quote, "has again opened wide the wounds of Watergate." End of quote. And since the U.S. Senate race and other congressional races were safely in Democratic hands, all eyes within the party turned to Clinton's campaign. The Clinton campaign also started receiving national help, with one person joining the campaign being Jody Powell, who worked closely with Georgia Governor Jimmy Carter and would later be the future president's press secretary. As I already mentioned, a lot of money came into the campaign, which allowed Clinton to run television and radio ads throughout the district. In fact, Clinton said that his television ads were rudimentary, but the radio ads were great. He would eventually rack up endorsements, including from the Arkansas Gazette, the state's largest paper. Wherever he went, he was well received. And the polls showed this as well. In an internal poll in mid-October from the Clinton campaign, Clinton had 38.1% to Hammerschmidt's 43.3% and 18.6% undecided. The race was now much closer. If you would like to go a little deeper into the campaign, Clinton's autobiography, My Life, tells a lot of personal stories with staff, supporters, and voters that really put a personal spin on the race. Unfortunately for Clinton, it wasn't enough in the end. Though he had the early lead on election night, Hammerschmidt would close in once the most Republican county, Sebastian County, came in. With that, Clinton lost the lead and eventually lost the race. However, his results were extremely impressive. In 1972, Hammerschmidt won the district by 54% over Guy W. Hatfield. Against Clinton, he only won by 4%, making this one of the biggest swings throughout the nation. Michael Barone, in his Almanac of American Politics 1976, said, quote, "Observers of the Arkansas political scene predict a long career for Clinton, whether he runs for Congress again or some other office." End of quote. Now, the Clinton campaign is the one that we'll talk about the most in the series. The reason for that is there's a lot more information about Clinton's campaign in the newspapers and his autobiography, My Life. As for Obama's autobiography, he only spends one page on the 2000 Democratic primary. As for Bush's autobiography, it's mostly about his time as president, and from what I can see, doesn't really talk about his congressional campaign at all. And with that, let's move on to Clinton's successor in the White House, George W. Bush. Like Bill Clinton, George W. Bush had never run for public office prior to 1978. But unlike Bill Clinton, Bush came from a politically connected family, with his father being former CIA director and congressman from Texas, though his district was in East Texas, and his grandfather being a U.S. Senator. In West Texas, the 19th congressional district was now open due to the retirement of Democrat George Mann, who served in Congress for 44 years. On July 18, 1977, at the Midland Regional Air Terminal, Bush Jr. became the first candidate of either party to announce that he was running for the seat. During his announcement, he said that one of the reasons he was qualified was because he had never been in government. Okay, then I guess 99% of the population would qualify. Anyway, he said that he made his announcement early so that nobody else would jump into the GOP primary. His campaign manager was his brother Neil Bush, who you might remember from the Silverado saving and loan scandal in the late 1980s. Unfortunately for Bush, this wouldn't be the case. Jim Reese, the former mayor of Odessa and candidate in the previous election, entered the race, as well as Joe Hickox, a former Air Force officer. When it came to the three Republican candidates, their issues were quite different. For Reese, his focus was on the suffering that farmers had been going through and socially conservative issues. As for Hickox, being an Air Force guy, he focused on Soviet US relations, saying that America had fallen behind the Soviet Union in military strength and supported the concept of individualism, basically libertarianism. As for Bush, he touted that he was a free market conservative that supported deregulation of the energy sector, but also more subsidies for farmers. He was also a big tax cut person. But there were also some political dynamics as well. Jim Reese was backed by Ronald Reagan, who had challenged President Ford for the Republican nomination 2 years earlier. As for Bush, he wasn't really backed by anyone and actually talked about not having help come from other people from outside of Texas, though it was pretty much known that he probably was more of a person that was backed by Ford. But as with the Clinton campaign, Bush's experience was attacked, especially by Reese. Reese stressed his time as mayor of Odessa while saying Bush simply just had the name and the money, which was true. On the flip side, both Hickox and Bush said that Reese felt that he was entitled to the seat, with Hickox saying that Reese had a "how dare you run" attitude, and Bush saying that Reese acts as if he has an inherent right to the seat because he ran for the seat before. As primary day approaches, Reese sharpens his attacks on Bush. He makes it a habit to call Bush Jr. to make it known that he is simply known because of his father's name. Reese also attacks Bush's residency, with the Houston Post reporting, quote, Reese also reminds voters that he has lived and worked in the district for years, while Bush only recently moved back to the city where he lived as a teenager. End of quote. On top of that, Reese said that because of Bush's name being the same name as his father, that many voters in the district might think that they're actually voting for Bush Sr. instead of Bush Jr. As for Bush, he didn't lean into the attacks. Instead, he continued with his campaign plan. As a result, he is taken as a serious candidate. With the name and the money, he gets most of the major endorsements in the region, including those of the major newspapers. On primary day, which was May 6, 1978, George Bush won 47.6% of the vote, just shy of the 50% needed to avoid a runoff, just like Bill Clinton 4 years earlier. Jim Reese received 41.5%, and Hickox was a distant third at 11%. 1 month later, Bush would go on to win the primary runoff with 55.8% of the votes. In the general election, he would take on Kent Hance, a lawyer and state senator from Lubbock. There would later be rumors that Reese would start his own write-in campaign after the loss, but that never materialized. As for Hance, he was a typical boll weevil Democrat, a name given to conservative Southern Democrats, which came from a bug that destroyed cotton crops and were very difficult to eradicate. The name would later be revitalized in the 1980s by Texas Congressman Charlie Stenholm, who was also elected to Congress in 1978 from Texas as a Democrat. And yes, that is me with Congressman Stenholm back in the day in his DC office. I think this was like 1994 or 1995 or something. During the time of the general election campaign, George Bush was making quite a bit of news. But not that George Bush, but this George Bush. It started to be known that George Bush Sr. was taking serious steps to making a run for the presidency. Therefore, a lot of the news about George Bush at this time was mostly about his father. Still, this didn't hurt his son in the slightest. Not much happened in the campaign in July, but in August, Bush started attacking Hance based on him being an attorney, stating that Washington, D.C. already had a number of lawyers running the country, and it was these people who covered up Koreagate. Now, this was the first time that I had ever heard of Koreagate, but it seems to be a scandal where South Korean officials funneled money through a South Korean businessman to pay bribes to 10 Democratic congressmen in order to curry favor for policy towards South Korea. So, yes, this was a thing. Bush would also talk about his fiscal conservatism, such as reducing spending and cutting taxes. But while Bush was discussing cutting taxes, Hance was actually cutting taxes in the state Senate. During the last session of the Texas legislature, Hance sponsored and passed bills that raised the tax exemption on Texas's inheritance tax from $25,000 to $200,000, as well as eliminating a 4% tax on utilities. So even though Bush made the fiscally conservative argument, Hance had the record and backed it up. Now, in all fairness, there really wasn't much difference between the two candidates. As Jeannie Keever of the San Angelo Standard-Times put it, quote, "The two candidates are much alike. Both are young, both are bright and articulate, and both are moderate to conservative politically. They even agree on the big difference between them, who can be the most effective, the fastest." End of quote. But the Republicans were serious about winning congressional seats in Texas, spending a record amount at the congressional level, with the 19th being one of their biggest targets because it was an open seat with ultra-conservative West Texas voters. But the Hance campaign treated it as they had already had it in the bag, since Hance's previous senatorial campaign gave him a good network in the district. But Bush, despite fighting hard for the district, also kept the campaign to the issues and never personally attacked Hance. For example, when Hance canceled the attendance of a political forum between the two candidates on September 14th, Bush said, quote, "He did not do it intentionally. He's a good fella, and I well understand the conflicts of campaign scheduling." End of quote. But when it came to Hance, he continued to push the narrative that Bush was only there because of who his family was. But in the debate on October 24th, things came to a boiling point. Bush attacked Hance as not being a true conservative voice, but just another voice of the liberal economic policies of Democratic Speaker Tip O'Neill. But Hance's attacks were more personal, saying, quote, "My daddy and my granddaddy were farmers. They didn't have anything to do with the mess that we're in right now, and Bush's father has been in politics all his life." End of quote. Hance would also go on to attack Bush for his Harvard and Yale education and that his family was tied to Northeast liberal elites. He would continue by saying, quote, "George Bush hasn't earned the living he enjoys. I'm on my own 2 feet and I make my own living." End of quote. In response, Bush said, quote, "I guess we're in the heat of the battle and Kent is feeling a little bit under pressure. I'm proud of what my father has accomplished and I'm proud of my education, but I have spent half of my life in West Texas and this is my home." End of quote. In the closing days of the campaign, Democrats saw the seat was becoming more competitive. Democratic National Chairman John C. White said in late October that he was confident that the Democrats would retain all 22 of their seats in Texas, but one of the districts that they thought they could lose was the 19th. Some had been calling the race a toss up. By Election Day, it was assumed that Hance would win, but nobody would be surprised if Bush won as well. Ken Hance would go on to defeat George W. Bush, winning 53.2% of the votes to Bush's 46.8%. This was by far the closest race that Hance would have, destroying the opposition in future congressional races. Also, another Republican who was defeated for Attorney General of Texas was James Baker, who became instrumental in Bush becoming president in 2000. And with that, let's move on to George Bush's successor in the White House, Barack Obama. Unlike Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, Barack Obama had already been holding public office when he decided to run for Congress in 1999 in Illinois' 1st Congressional District, which he would later call a stupid mistake in his autobiography, A Promised Land. But before we get into Obama's campaign, let's talk about the incumbent congressman, Bobby Rush. Rush was a member of the Black Panther Party back in the 1970s and ran unsuccessfully for the Chicago City Council in 1975. However, he would eventually run and win in 1983 along with newly elected Mayor Harold Washington. Check out my video about that election. After being elected to the city council, Rush would run for Congress in 1992 and win the Democratic primary, with the Democratic incumbent Charles Hayes losing. Since it was a strong Democratic district, Rush would go on to win the general election. In the next 3 elections, Rush wouldn't have any serious Democratic or Republican opposition, but in 1999, Rush decided to run for mayor against the incumbent mayor Richard M. Daley, offering voters a return to the politics of Harold Washington, the first black mayor of Chicago. Daley would go on to easily defeat Rush, winning 72% to Rush's 28%. As for Barack Obama, he said, quote, "I thought Rush's campaign had been uninspired, without rationale other than the vague promise to continue Harold Washington's legacy." End of quote. Even with this defeat, Rush retained his congressional seat. And even with the solid defeat, many thought that Rush could even lose his congressional seat. One of those, of course, was Obama. While Obama eventually said that it was a stupid decision to run for the seat, his rationale was, quote, "If this was how he operated in Congress, I figured I could do better." End of quote. Obama talked about it with some of his advisors and conducted an internal poll and found that he was within striking distance of Bobby Rush. With that, he started an exploratory committee and started raising funds. By August of 1999, it was no secret that Obama was eyeing the seat, along with Donnie Trotter, another state senator from Chicago, and no relation to me. On September 19th, 1999, Obama officially launched his campaign for the congressional seat at the Palmer House Hotel in the Loop. Many in city government who supported Mayor Daley endorsed Obama early. John Schmidt, who was Daley's former chief of staff, was Obama's chief fundraiser. At the time of his announcement, Obama had already raised more than $100,000 as he filed his paperwork in August. While it might not have been overt, it was implicit that Daley's people had close ties to the Obama campaign. Obama came out swinging, saying that, quote, "Rush represented a politics that is rooted in the past and reactive politics that isn't very good at coming up with concrete solutions." End of quote. But he didn't only attack Rush, but also advocated for spending money in schools, such as $50 million to put more computers in schools. In December, Obama introduced a bill in the Illinois Senate asking for racial statistics to be publicly available in all motorist stops by the police, bringing light to the racial profiling problem in the nation. Rush announced that he was running for re-election on November 1st, but failed to answer any of Obama's requests for a debate. As for the Rush campaign, they painted Obama as an outsider who was Harvard educated and that he was the choice of the whites and elites. Now, just as a disclaimer, this came from Obama's biography and not from news accounts at the time. But early in the game, the tone was set. Huey Rich, Bobby Rush's son, was shot on October 18, 1999, and would later die in the hospital. Obama would suspend his campaign for a month, but in December, Obama decided to take his family to Hawaii for Christmas vacation to visit his grandmother. At the same time that Obama was in Hawaii, Republican Governor George Ryan called a special session of the Illinois legislature to pass the Safe Neighborhoods Act, a strong anti crime bill that increased penalties on those who committed a crime with a firearm. This was legislation that Obama had supported previously and still currently supported. But when Ryan called the special election, his daughter Malia was sick with the flu. Therefore, Obama stayed in Hawaii and the act was 5 votes short. After his return to Chicago, his campaign was haunted by his failure to return to Chicago for the vote. Still, Obama said, quote, "I cannot sacrifice the health or well-being of my daughter for politics. I had to make a decision based on what I felt was appropriate for my daughter and for my wife. If the press take my absence as a reason for the failure of the Safe Neighborhoods bill, then that's how the press is going to report it. I have a track record of someone in Springfield who takes his legislative duties seriously." End of quote. But it wasn't just that which caused problems for the Obama campaign. Now that the campaign had money, they were able to commission a proper poll, according to his autobiography. In that poll, he found that Bobby Rush's name identification was at 90% and approval rating was at 70%, while Obama's name identification was only at 11%. The campaign started to crash as it was approaching closer to primary day, which was March 21st. January was filled with Obama being questioned about his trips to Hawaii. February was a mixed bag. On February 6, U.S. Senator Dick Durbin endorsed Bobby Rush. Obama did get some helpful endorsements, such as from the Independent Voters of Illinois, Independent Precinct Organization, or IVI-IPO, which supported Harold Washington during his time as mayor. However, on February 17th, Rush did agree to a debate with Obama, Trotter, and George C. Roby, a retired police officer who had entered the race. The first debate was held on WVON radio on February 28th. All sides were pretty cordial, but there were some fireworks. Donnie Trotter mentioned that Obama had missed the Safe Neighborhoods Act votes, though Trotter voted for it because he was in the state Senate as well. While there is only one newspaper account of the debate by the Daily Herald, it was reported that during the commercial break, Obama's campaign ran a commercial accusing Rush of being insensitive to seniors when it came to prescription drugs. The article continues by saying that the temperature rose in the debate. Unfortunately, we don't know anything beyond that, nor who was considered the winner of the debate. The second debate was held at Trinity United Church of Christ, but without Bobby Rush. Unfortunately, another family tragedy struck. On the same day of the debate, Rush went to Georgia because his father was extremely ill. 2 days later, his father would die. When Rush returned, the 4 candidates would participate in a number of debates. In the latter days of the campaign, things were starting to look up for Obama. Catholic priest Michael Pfleger, who had and currently is highly involved with the Black community in Chicago, as well as a strong advocate for gun control, said that he and his supporters were going to back Barack Obama. He also started gaining more local support with aldermen, community activists, and policy advocates to his side. A few weeks later, a slew of state representatives would endorse Obama. This was further bolstered by the Chicago Tribune also endorsing Obama, saying, quote, "Obama is smart and energetic. He was the first Black president of the Harvard Law Review, and he is committed to his community. He has fresh ideas on governing, and he understands that as congressman for the 1st District, he would become a spokesman for African American concerns nationally and an important voice in shaping urban politics in Chicago and the nation." End of quote. But then the biggest endorsement in the race came. On March 11th, President Bill Clinton endorsed Bobby Rush in the primary. Prior to this endorsement, Clinton had stayed neutral in the 2000 primaries, but in this case, he supported Rush and even produced a radio commercial for Rush in the last week and a half of the campaign. Unfortunately, I can't find any copy of this commercial, but it was reported in the Daily Herald on March 12th. Vice President Al Gore soon followed, and Jesse Jackson endorsed Rush before Clinton. So, yes, one can say that the Clinton Obama rivalry didn't start in 2008, but instead in 2000. Honestly, the Clinton and Jackson endorsements were the final nails in the coffin for any candidate. Bobby Rush would go on to win the election with 61% of the vote to Obama's 30.4%. Of course, had he won the first congressional district, who knows if he would have run for the US Senate and eventually president. He would have probably been in the House leadership and just stayed there. Of course, we'll never know. And that's it. That's the video about the 3 losing congressional campaigns for 3 presidents that served a combined total of 24 years consecutively in the White House. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. If you want to support the channel, please join my Patreon or watch one of the other playlists with other videos that I've done. Have a wonderful day wherever it is you are, and I will see you in the next video. So long for now.